I appreciate everyone who's taking a little bit of time out of their day and ask these great questions, and spending some time with us here. What was I going to say? Just want to make sure that everyone has the ability, if you want to ask questions. I may not get to all of them, but we're going to try. But no, this is a great opportunity. Over 70 people have, shown an interest in coming to this thing. And if you don't all show up, I'm going to hunt you down. So I'll find you one way or another. But I appreciate the energy and the effort and the interest from our customers. So it really means a lot to me. So as we get started, real quickly, just a little bit about me. My name's Tim Milligan. I've been with Plateau about 12 years. I started as a technician treating fire ants, hired on as a temporary technician, treating fire ants during the fall when we do a lot of fire ant treatment, and then, filling feeders, checking nest boxes, doing all the wildlife management activities for our customers, our landowners that we work with. Learned from that part of the business, and then moved into the sales part of it, working with our biologists and working with landowners individually, doing presentations for the company, telling people about wildlife management. Probably the way a lot of y'all found out about us was one of our seminars. So doing those and learning from each of our biologists and the people we have working with us and our registered property tax consultants and all those folks. As things progressed, our property was in ag to begin with. We were in traditional ag, had livestock on my property all our lives with my father and my family. As things changed, wildlife management became an option for us, became the better alternative for us. So we moved our property into wildlife. We're a landowner. I've got a property that's on the east side of Travis County, modest sized property that we do wildlife management on. We've been in wildlife for about 7 years. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I was interested in doing this and why I felt like I could bring something to the table is that I've done a lot of this stuff. A lot of the questions we're getting and a lot of the things that people are going to talk about, I've done them, and I've dealt with the appraisal districts. I had to deal with the application process, all the other things. So, and I had to deal with what I was doing once I got into wildlife management. So that's a little bit about me. Live in Dripping Springs now, wife and a couple kids, and enjoy the wildlife management, enjoy being outdoors, and really enjoy working for Plateau. So, and that's, again, why I'm showing up here today. So as I started thinking about this thing, this is what came to my mind. Two things and two reasons for doing this. The questions that we get after people have gotten into wildlife management, after our landowners have decided to make that commitment and do it, is one, what have I got myself into? I thought the same thing when I got into wildlife management, and I wanted to get this reassurance real quickly that I wasn't in over my head. And then two, the question that we get all the time, a lot of people show up to our presentations and our seminars now who are in wildlife management already, but they come to our seminar to ask that question: is this a good activity? There's a funny little clip of a comedian that it makes me chuckle every time I hear it now, because it's a bunch of kids that are asking their mom, is that a good activity? And it just makes me laugh, because it makes me think about, that's the thought that goes through my head. Anytime I'm doing something on my farm, I was out there this past weekend, and as I was doing things, I was wondering, is that a good activity? Is this going to qualify? Is it good for my property? Am I going to see some reward and some benefit out of this? Is my property going to benefit from it? So those are the questions that came to my mind, and it made me think, okay, let's get online and talk about this stuff. Y'all are all either Plateau customers, or, we've done a wildlife management plan for you, or I think there's some folks that are in Eco Lab maybe that are going to be moving into wildlife management. So you understand these 7 wildlife categories. You've seen these before. This is kind of where these questions come from, and the different categories, the different activities that are out there, the different things you can do. We all know that we have to do them. This is what we're doing instead of feeding cows. There's all, or cutting timber or baling hay or whatever it may be. There's all these different activities we can do, and a lot of the questions come up around these activities. So I wanted to throw those out there real quick. One of the things I want to point out is, and you all know this, you obviously know you can reach out to us, but it's important to me to make sure everybody knows you're not alone. When you get into this thing, there's a gentleman that I work with in Wimberley, and I remember telling his family one time, we got him into this, we're going to get him out. He needed a lot of help. And it was, he made the decision to move into wildlife management, but he probably needed more help than some others. And so I felt obligated, I think we all felt obligated, to make sure that he understood what he was doing and he could do it and be successful with it. You're not alone. You've got Plateau behind you. We've got a wildlife management plan with Plateau. You've got us. You know how to reach us. If nothing else, you've got my name, Tim Milligan. You've got of course, we've got our receptionist. We've got Cameron Bain. You've got your sales guys, your biologist, everyone you can reach out to. Anyone at our company can help you when you have questions. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. I love that y'all came to this, and I love that you brought your questions. Feel free to go online, ask questions online. call us at the regular number. I'll go over that in a minute. But you're not alone. This slide right here, I stuck up here for two reasons. One, if you got a wildlife management plan, you've seen this little slide. You've seen this thing that kind of helps you understand when to do your activities and the best times of year to do certain things. This is the part where I look at this and I go, man, that's great. It's a wonderful piece. It tells a lot of things, but it can be confusing. Wildlife management can be confusing. And so as hard as we may try to get that information to you, this was our attempt and someone's attempt to put together a piece that would help people understand when to do certain things. But you've got to understand what you're looking at to know what all these colors are and know what all these different things are. And so sometimes you may just need to ask somebody a question of, rather than me going and you having to go and look at this, hey, when's the best time for me to check nest boxes? When's the best time for me to do a deer survey? This is great, but it can be confusing, and that's why we're here. We've got tools, we've got things on our website that can help you with documenting your activities, that can help you with being successful in wildlife management and feeling more comfortable with what you're doing. We're here. I mean, there's this assistance. This phone number, you've all probably got, we've got 800 numbers, we've got all kinds of things, but that main number right there is the best number to reach us. And my understanding is these slides will be online later and you'll be able to get to any of this, but you have this information in your wildlife management plan. You've got a phone number, you can call it, ask for your, whoever helped you with your plan, ask for someone to help you with whether it's getting products or services or just questions in general like you have today. Always, that you can go there. You can go to our website and find contact information there, those kind of things. So use those resources. Use us as a resource when you're in wildlife management. So now we're going to get into some landowner submitted questions. That's the beginning. That's the end of the kind of introduction part. We're going to get into some of these questions. I may not get to everyone's questions right now, but we're going to try. We may not get there, but we're going to try. I'm going to ask that as I go through these questions, as I've done this before, there's always follow-up questions. So, y'all are going to ask some questions of Avalon on the side, and she's going to read those later. I'm going to try to answer these in the most kind of succinct way I can. Just get an answer to your question. And there's probably going to be follow-up questions, that maybe my answer brings up. Do me a favor, and if you do have a follow-up question, maybe hold on to that and email me directly or call me directly, and I'd be happy to spend ample time with you. I'm not going to have time to go through all those things. And I'm not a biologist. I want to get that out of the way up front. I'm not a biologist. I'm not going to try to answer questions that I don't know the answers to, but I have access to folks that can. So if I tell you, hey, call us and ask for your biologist and talk to them and get that answer from them, that's the best thing to do. I'll try to help you with that. You can always call me and I'll get you to the right person, but I'm not going to try to answer questions I can't. So, with that, we'll get into a few of the questions and see where we go. And hopefully this works out great and we do it again next month and we have a lot of fun with this. I want y'all to be able to ask these questions anytime. So first question, this one is interesting. And what's interesting about it is that it came from a customer. So part one of this question is, how do I receive and maintain a wildlife management exemption related to birds and butterflies or other similar types of efforts? So this person, what was interesting to me about this question is that it came from one of our existing landowners who we did a plan for their property in another county, which was a larger property, and they were managing for larger animals and white-tailed deer and things like that. And it was more of a deer-centric plan. That's what they wanted to do. They hunt on that property. They do some other things. They've got a smaller property that's on the other side of Texas that's more recreational, and it's more appropriate for small animals, birds, butterflies, things like that. And it reminded me that we may have talked a little bit about birds and butterflies even on that other property, but it wasn't relevant to them at the time. And so they didn't really sink in that, hey, I can manage for whatever I want to. So you can receive the wildlife exemption on any property that's an ag, and you can manage for whatever you want to. It could be a 10,000 acre property and you want to manage for songbirds and butterflies on that big property. It can be a smaller property and you can manage for songbirds or butterflies. Different size properties and different habitats are going to have different animals and different species that make more sense. And we're going to try to help with that, but you can manage for whatever you want to on any property. Are there some counties that are more resistant to granting this type of exemption than others? What are tips and suggestions for working with these? The first tip or suggestion, of course, is, work with Plateau. Y'all have done that. You understand that. There are counties that are a little more standoffish, a little more hesitant. It is a statewide program. It's mandated. It's state mandated. They don't have the option, but some of them look at it and they read the laws differently. That's where we come in. We understand those laws. I think what I wrote down earlier was they know us and we know them. These appraisal districts know who we are. They know that we know the law. So we run into a little less resistance. They're not sometimes it's not resistance, it's just a misunderstanding. So oftentimes, if you run into something like that, I remember going to, I think it was Mason County one year, and as I did a presentation, I talked to the appraisal district, and I reminded everybody, look, if you hear something that you don't understand or something that doesn't quite make sense to you, just call us. So if you're thinking about doing this on a property somewhere, a different property than you have already, and you're wondering if you qualify or not, the easy way to find out is just to call us about it and talk to us about it. So hopefully that's that. Next question. I've sent in all the wildlife reports requested by the appraisal district. I haven't received any response if I'm approved. Will the CAD send me anything? Is no news good news? So yes, no news in general is good news. Appraisal district are not required to tell you that you're approved. They're only required to tell you if you've been denied. So, and yeah, they are kind of overwhelmed right now. All of them are. Everyone is a little bit. COVID's affecting a little bit of this. I'm dealing with, Travis County right now, and I know they're struggling because just like we all are. I mean, things are just different right now. They're not in their office. They're not able to travel around as much as they need to. They're not able to meet with people as much as they want to. So it's going to affect some of that, but that's not really the reason why you may not hear about, when you do a wildlife management plan, they don't necessarily have to send you an approval. They just have to send you something if you've been denied. So in general, no news is good news. You can always call us and ask us, and we can, call the county. You can always call the county yourself and ask them. It's not going to hurt anything. If you sent them a good report, I call them and ask them about mine. So don't ever hesitate to call them and ask them. On wildlife management plans, if you've done a plan with us, we call the county and we confirm. That's part of what we're doing right now, is confirming that all of our people have been approved. Everyone that we've done a plan for has been approved. So we'll go through this process of dealing with the counties to make sure. So let's see, another two-part question. What are the best times of the year to check nest boxes? And what do I do to increase the number of bluebirds in my boxes? So short answer, part one, best time of year to check nest boxes. What did they tell me? Let's see. Late winter to early spring. So January, late January, February, early March. So late winter, early spring, before the breeding season starts. It starts in kind of March, mid-March time frame. Late winter, early spring, and then again, late summer, early fall. So what you're doing is you're checking them before the breeding season to make sure that anything that got in there in the winter, whether it's wasp or ants or whatever else, you're making sure that that's cleaned out before the breeding season. And then you're cleaning them out and checking them after the breeding season as well. So after the end of spring, late summer, early fall, you check them again to kind of clean out the stuff that was in there before, and that's helping prepare them for the next year as well. You can check them as many times as you want to, as much as you want to. Now, if they've got little birds in them, you don't want to check them too often, but get your kids involved. One of the fun things to do is check those birdhouses. You can open them during the breeding season. Don't think that you can't go out there and look at them during the spring. There's nothing more fun than having a young kid, look inside one of those boxes and seeing those little birds in there, with their little mouths open looking at you. That's not going to bother them. It's not going to bother the mama bird. I remember as a technician one year, we were treating nest boxes and breeding had started early or something. And we went and opened up a nest box, and I was out there in the field, and little birds came jumping out everywhere. They were jumping all over the little tree limbs. One of them jumped out and landed on my shirt. I didn't know what to do. I was stressed out because I was always heard, you don't touch a little animal. Well, apparently the mama birds don't really have a sense of smell. That's only for mammals. So you can pick them up, put them back. If they do happen to fall out, you can pick them up, put them back in the nest, those kind of things. So, but that's in general the way to check them. And then to increase the number of bluebirds, using the boxes, there's a few things you can do. Bluebirds are like any other bird. They like bugs. So anything you can do to increase, that's going to increase bluebirds in the area. Native grasses, large, tall grasses, things like that. Disking and mowing and, changing things around to where you get some extra weed growth and bugs, those kind of things. Making sure the most important thing you can do is make sure the boxes are in the right areas. Bluebirds in general, specifically like open areas. So you want them in a pasture. You don't want them in the woods. If you're aiming at bluebirds, you want them out on a pole in a pasture where they're out in the open and they can see all around them. They're just, they're open nesters. They want to be out in those big open areas. And the other thing that I was told is important is putting a baffle or a predator guard of some kind on those bird boxes. So it's not required, but it's something that will help help those bluebirds be able to, exist in your bluebird boxes. So those are things you can do, making sure they're in the right places and making sure you've got a predator kind of a baffle of some kind on them. Let's see. What can I do to increase the number of turkeys on my property? A lot like any other bird, as far as, providing food, providing shelter. an example of our place, we had an open coastal pasture up in the front. We had never, I don't think we'd ever seen turkey on our property. And recently, in the last few years, after being in wildlife management and letting that coastal pasture go, we cleared a bunch of brush and built big brush piles in that pasture as well. So now there's cover out in this area that there wasn't cover before. And all of a sudden, we were getting turkey on the camera. Same happened at a ranch that I work on in Fredericksburg that I do some work on. There were turkey all over the river, but they never showed up on the property. Well, the property was being heavily grazed. There wasn't a lot of cover. There are turkey all over that place now because there's more cover. The turkey can move back and forth from the river onto their property without being seen as much. So increasing cover, increasing native grasses, disking, mowing, those kind of things to increase the growth of native grasses. Breaking up the ground on a lot of properties is going to be a good thing to do, just simply because it's going to bring in some forbs, some weed growth, and it's going to help those native grasses take on. But the more you can do to increase cover, and then of course providing food and water for turkey, whether it's with one of our turkey feeders or providing supplemental water, anything you can do to provide what the animals need is going to increase the number of turkey. Okay, little warning here about this question. I told Avalon to stop me if I went more than 30 minutes on this one. I'm just kidding. It's about quail, and that's one of my passions. It's just something I love doing. I talked to a guy. I had this memory of a gentleman calling me about quail one time on the way to Brenham to visit my wife's family. And I talked to him for 2 hours on the way there, and then called him back and talked to him for 2 hours on the way home. So I'll try not to go on, but this is a very simple question, and it's kind of the same as the turkey question. The landowner in Bastrop County, is it feasible to support a quail population on my property? What activities can I do to attract quail? Anything you do to help quail is going to help everything else too. So this is an important question. They're such a fickle little species. They're on the bottom end of the totem pole. And it is feasible to support a population of quail. I don't care what size property is. It's feasible to help quail. We manage or help manage over 1 million acres now. That's not a bunch of 10,000 acre properties. That's a lot of 20 and 30 and 12 and 50 and 40 acre properties. And to listen to, a lot of people think they don't have enough land to help quail. You may not manage the population on your property, but you can provide for that population on your property. So smaller properties, larger properties, it really doesn't matter. You can do things to help quail. And those are the same things, and the same things you do are going to help everything else too. Providing some open ground, providing food, providing shelter, disking, opening up, so breaking up ground that hasn't been broken up in a while. If you've got a grass pasture, coastal pasture, those kind of things. Providing shelter and providing food. Providing water will help attract them. It'll help them stay there. They don't necessarily need water. They get water from their food. The thing I want people to know about quail live a lot like we do. This is the example I use with everybody. I grew up in the middle of Austin, right on 45th and Shoal Creek, right in that area. We lived there because there was a church close by, a bank close by, a grocery store, a library, schools, fire department. Everything was close. We had all of our needs met in a very short distance, a very small area. Quail need the same thing. They have kind of 4 basic needs: food, shelter, loafing cover, and nesting cover. And if you can provide those 4 things, and I can go into more detail about what those are, but if you can provide all their needs in a small area, quail will stay on your property. They'll stay in that general area. You always find them, no matter how big the property is, you find them in the areas where all those things are met. They only move about a mile in their lifetime. So there's a lot that a landowner can do, especially, Bastrop County. Our place is out close to you. So I, love to visit with you more about quail at any time. I'm going to jump off that question, or else Avalon's going to zap me with something over here. But don't give up on quail. Don't ever give up, and don't think your property is too small. Let's see. What is the lowest, most cost-effective way to protect a lot of saplings from animal damage? As I looked at that question, the thought hit me that of what I've done here to protect saplings from animal damage. And the easiest, most cost-effective way is, if you're clearing brush somewhere, stack brush around and build a think about a tomato cage, or if you were going to put wire cages around all of them. That's most kind of an effective way to do it, is to put a wire cage around each one. Tomato cages work well, but if you're clearing brush, like on my place, we're clearing mesquite, and I've got little saplings of oak trees coming up in there. And that's what the deer are going to eat. So I can stack those mesquite branches around them for a couple of years and leave them there, and then move them off later. Or your cedar branches, When you're clearing cedar, if you've got anytime you see a little Spanish oak sapling on your property, just remember that is ice cream to deer. So if you see a Spanish oak, a little Spanish oak sapling, stack something around and protect it for a couple of years so it sets a good root. So when they go up there and they eat that leaf, they just eat the leaf. They don't pull it up by the roots and it'll keep growing. But the most cost-effective way is just to use the brush. Use what you've used. Use what's on your property. Stack brush around it, and that'll do it. And short of that, wire. We've used tomato cages, that kind of thing. It's a good question. Let's see. What are the differences in block, mosaic, and strip patterns for brush management, and how are these done? So all that's really saying is there are different ways of saying creating edge. What you're doing when you do brush management is creating an edge. You're removing some brush to change the level of growth. It's no different than mowing an area. So brush management could be mowing. It could be mowing low-growing brush, and all of a sudden you're creating an edge along that. Block, mosaic, and strip patterns are just saying different ways of doing the same thing. If you think about the way a natural wildfire happens, it doesn't happen in a straight line. Wildfire doesn't come through a property and just make a straight line across it that looks like you just drove from one point to another. It wanders and meanders through the property. So that's, if you think about, strip patterns or mosaics, it's a meandering kind of thing. I've got, in our front of our property, we do strip mowing where we just mow, just random, they're not strips. They're not straight strips. You can do it like that. You can do it just like you're plowing a pasture to plant something and disc and mow and do your brush management that way too. You can cut senderos that are straight and you're creating an edge. You've got tall growth next to low growth, or you can do it in blocks in certain segments. So you end up with, and what you end up with, if you think about a block, if you've got a square that's got brush in it and next to it it's a square that's open, you've got 4 different edges in each one of those little squares. So you're creating more edge. Wildlife love edge. They love a low area next to a tall area. So they've got their open area where they can see next to a brushy area that they can escape into. So that's what that is. I mean, block, mosaic, and strip patterns are just different ways of saying not clearing everything. So, if I was going to mow my yard and mow it in blocks, I'd leave some of it unmowed. More mosaics or strips or however I want to do it. That's just different than mowing the whole thing. So let's see. All right. So we are new landowners in Belleville. Awesome. We applied for wildlife management with the help of Plateau and received confirmation that our application was approved. Hey, we know Austin County sends confirmation, so that's cool. Since we heard that in May and our application has been approved, will we see a decrease in our taxes for 2020? So you shouldn't see a decrease in your taxes. This is an interesting question. I looked at it today because it caught me off guard at first because I was like, well, they do need to let somebody know if their taxes are going down. But I don't think you shouldn't see a decrease in your taxes, because if you're in wildlife, you have to be in ag first. So your taxes should have already been in traditional ag, should have already been in open space. You're paying those lower taxes already. When you move into wildlife, your property taxes stay the same. So there's no difference there that would affect anything as far as your mortgage goes or something like that. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't call your mortgage company and make sure that when the taxes were estimated for, put into escrow or however all that works, that they used ag taxes. Sometimes they can use market value taxes. You'll know. And I think that's an important thing to do. It's just there's an annual review that they do of all that escrow stuff. So they're going to look at that, but they're going to look at property taxes to see what needs to go into your property or into your mortgage bill. But more than anything, your taxes wouldn't have decreased when you went into wildlife management. So it shouldn't affect that at all. That doesn't mean you shouldn't check into it. That might be especially true for some of the folks that are in Ecolab right now who have gone from market value into that lower, open space valuation to make sure if you've got a mortgage on the property that's recognized in that. It should be, but you might want to check. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, let's see. One of our activities is supplemental food in regards to deer. We tried to modify the existing spin cast to be only stationary and pellet feeder, and noticed a huge increase in hog activity. So they went from just making it a free choice pellet feeder and noticed a bunch of hogs. We wanted to know if we used only a protein block feeder mounted on a pole to discourage hogs, does that still satisfy? Yes. So if any kind of supplemental feeder, I just went out and put a block on a wheel rim on my property. It's just sitting there on the ground. It's going to get eaten up by who knows what, but it is a qualifying activity. I've taken pictures of it. I documented that I did it, and the deer will get to it and they'll eat it. Right now during the spring is a good time to be feeding protein because deer need it. But I do understand same thing happens on our property. You start feeding more, you get hogs. That's just the way it works. So the first thing I'd ask myself is, why am I feeding deer? Do I really want to feed deer? Do I need to feed the deer? Is that the right thing? Or can I feed, turkey and feed bird seed, which the hogs are not going to get as much out of it, so they're not going to be around as much. We cut off our feed at certain times a year. They don't need it as much as certain times a year, so we cut it off and the hogs go away. Hogs are opportunistic. When they know the food's going to be there, they'll come and get it. So, but yes, to your question of, can I mount it on a pole and do it differently than the regular feeder? Absolutely. I've stuck them up in trees. I've done all kinds of things. So any way that you provide supplemental food. The key would be, though, kind of looking at, is this really what I want to do? Do I really need to feed deer? Because if it's attracting hogs, you're going to want to shut it off. Otherwise, they're going to keep coming. Like I said, hogs are opportunistic. The other thing you could do is talk to your neighbor and see if you can get them to feed more. Get your neighbor to feed more, maybe the hogs will go over there. That's kind of what happened on our place. We cut off our feed for a while, and I know exactly where the hogs are going now. They're going to whoever's got a corn feeder running. They're just not showing up on our place as much, so that's kind of nice. Hopefully that answers that question. Let's see here. Next question. When the county approved our application, they indicated that they would send a wildlife management request in 2023. So they're going to ask for an annual report in 2023. We have a copy of the form, so you got that. We wanted to know if we need to do the report each year and save them, or can we consolidate for 3 years into one report? So I'm sure if the county has said they want one report, they'd be fine with you consolidating. I do one every year. My advice, and I think our advice would always be, do that annual report at the end of every year. Where it helped me was I did mine this year, and I was able to look back at my report from 5 years ago and see I was doing the same activities, and I was able to look at them and see what had changed and see whether it was working or not. Am I still doing it the same way? So each year I've got a record of what I did on my property that year, and I can refer back to it and see, okay, this is how long I've been doing that. We've got an erosion control area that we take pictures of every year as one of our activities. And if I wasn't able to go back and look at that picture from 5 years ago, 7 years ago, there's no way I would know for sure that it was doing what it was intended to do. So that part of it to me that's a good reason to do it every year. We help with those. So, I think most of y'all probably know this by now, but we do annual reports for people, kind of like an accountant does your taxes. You can send us all the information. I think it's $495 for us to compile that report for you. You can certainly do it yourself, but if you ever wanted to know that, hey, this is all, I've got a receipt of everything I did, everything Plateau did. A lot of folks that we're doing their activities for, they have us do this. But if you wanted basically a report that documented everything that you did every year, and the nice thing about, I guess having us do it is the fact that you know where it is. You don't have to worry about, did I hang on to it? When the county comes up, they may ask in 2023, they may ask again in 2025 or 2027, and who knows when they may ask. You'll know it's there, we've got it. I don't know, you can do all that yourself, but I just want to make sure people know that we handle those things as well. But I would do it every year, not wait until the 2023 and then try to compile everything. All right. Regarding brush mowing and brush hogging, what is the goal? We just sold all the cattle, and we have a lot of thorny plants and brambles coming in. We'd like to mow them and treat them. What's the end goal and what is allowed? So anything's allowed. It's your property, just so you know that. You can remove that stuff, do what you need to remove it. There are better ways of doing it. Kind of back to that question earlier about mosaic and block mowing and strip mowing, those kind of things. So the goal is always diversity. From my end and the way I look at it, diversity and creating an edge for me. If I'm creating an edge for the wildlife, different levels of growth. So if you got a bunch of brambles coming into an area, clearing some of those. I did some of this past weekend. That's exactly what I was out on our property doing. We've got about a 20-acre section in the front that a long time ago we cleared a bunch of mesquite out of it, and it's starting to grow back. It's growing back thicker in some areas, and in the middle section, it's just kind of patchy. So I went and cleared, some of the thicker area, some of the patchy area. There's some area that's completely clear, but there's some little ones coming in. I got rid of those to keep that area completely clear. The idea is now there's thick brush on one end, there's some patches in the middle, there's a really open area with none in part of it. So I'm just creating diversity, and I'm allowing different types of things to grow. So, anything, what did I think I wrote down earlier as I was looking at this, everything in moderation. So as your property changes, it's going to change. And that's another point to think about. Again, I mentioned I'm not a biologist. It's always a good idea to refer to your plan, refer to your biologist, call your biologist here and send us some pictures. Take pictures of the area and say, what should I do with this? If you don't want to, you can always hire us to come back out and take a look. visit with you on the property and talk to you about, addressing those thorny plants and brambles. We offer those services too. But short of that, giving us a little more, background, a little more visual evidence of the problem, and we can help you with some more specific instructions. But that's it. The goal is diversity, and not to let things become overwhelming. In my estimation, is just making sure that it doesn't get overgrown. That's what I'm dealing with our mesquite pasture right now. If we leave it alone, it's going to get overgrown again pretty quickly. So anyway, hope that answered that question. We switched the corn feeder from corn to pellet feed, and they just don't seem to like it. Yeah. What's best for attracting deer? Maybe a mixture. A mixture would be fine. Throwing in some extra corn would be fine. Making sure that if you're saying you're feeding deer as your supplemental food, we all know it has to be protein. So you need to be able to say that you are feeding protein. Adding in some corn to help attract them would be fine. At one point, we had 2 feeders going on our place. We had a corn feeder going because we were hunting deer and we wanted to attract them. We knew the protein's not going to attract them there, and it's got to be free choice. So we had the protein feeder over there, or a protein block, but we also had a corn feeder going. Corn is candy. And my advice, I guess, and all of our advice would be, if you're going to hunt them or you want to look at them, then, throw some corn out there and get them to come so you can see them. And so you can hunt them. We would advise normally don't do that unless you are planning on reducing their numbers, because the more corn you throw out, the more of them you're going to have. And they don't just eat your corn, they eat everything else too. So, keep that in mind. And then the other, kind of like I mentioned on the other feeder question earlier, if you wanted to switch to something like a bird, feeding for turkey or quail or songbirds, then you can feed, something other than protein, and then use your corn as a bait to the deer when you want to see them or when you want to hunt them, type of thing. Because it's always, corn's a bait. It's not a supplement, but it is candy. I mean, and it gets them to come. So if you want to attract them, add a little corn. All right. Next question. I keep track of my birds and wildlife I see every day. However, I don't take the time to count individuals. That's okay. I may see 20 bluebirds and write that down, but I'm not sure if they're matching pairs, bachelor groups, etc. I'd like to know what is allowed and what's expected. We have families of foxes living on our property. What do I track? Just that I see them each day. So this is an interesting question. You can do whatever you want to do. If you like writing down and documenting and journaling the animals that you see every day, then by all means enjoy that and do that. You don't have to necessarily do that. Those 20 bluebirds are likely the same 20 bluebirds every day. And so you can say what you want to do. As far as for this to be a qualifying activity, I think the requirement is that you have to have at least 100 observations throughout the year. So 20 bluebirds would be an observation in my opinion here. 3 foxes would be an observation. If you saw them at the same time, or you saw them, it's the same 3 foxes, that's an observation. So 100 observations throughout the year is basically 100 different, not specific animals, but 100 different times that were actually documenting what you saw on the property. 100 different observations, and it's hard for anyone to understand. It's hard for me to understand sometimes. I do it, but I also combine it with other things. The idea is you don't have to do it every day. My way of doing it is I keep a list of the animals that I see on my property each year. So it may be 15 white-tailed deer, 20 bluebirds, 7 foxes, 8 rabbits, 3, 20, I don't know, grackles, a bobcat. And so I write down all the animals that I see. And then I do the same thing next year, and I write down all the animals again. And I try to learn something from that. I try to look at it. Well, this year I saw turkey. I hadn't seen turkey before. This year I saw 6 coyotes, and I didn't see any turkey. I'm learning something from that. If you can look at what you're doing and you can tell yourself and you can feel like you're learning something from it, then I would feel confident in putting it into my report as a qualifying activity, especially if I can tell the county what I thought I learned from it. The one thing I want to add to this is do these kind of things because you enjoy doing them. You can hire somebody to do an actual survey. You can do a camera survey for a census activity. There's a lot of things you can do that are a little more regulated, a little more refined, that you can actually point to and say, this was a census activity. What I would do in this instance, and what I do with mine, is I have food, I have shelter, I have water. We do predator control, we do fire ant treatment. So we have 4 or 5 other activities that we're doing. And this one I just throw in there. It's a bonus. I do it because I like to. I don't have to worry about the county saying, well, you didn't quite do that right. Or someone saying, well, you didn't record quite enough activity. I'm not worried about it being a qualifying activity. It's an extra that I put in there. I want them to see, and I want to show myself, and I want to learn something. I'm doing that because I love doing it. It's kind of like managing for quail. I may not manage a population of quail. I'm going to try to keep them around my property. I'm going to try to help them because I feel good about it. It's a labor of love. It's something I want to do. And I know that when I'm doing it, it's helping everything else too. That's what this is doing as well. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially if you have 4 or 5, 3 or 4 or 5 other activities that you can fall back on that are easier for someone to understand. Food, shelter, water, those kind of things that are easy to point to and go, okay, I can check that box. Hopefully that answered that question. All right, next one. Getting to the end of these, and then we'll get into some more fun ones. Since we switched part of the property, but not all to ag and wildlife, what kind of card do I have to carry that I will use in storage for tax purposes? Are any wildlife expenses tax-free or just ag-related? So, okay, good question. We did the kind of the same thing. Part of our property is still in traditional ag. We're still ag producers. We qualify for an ag producer's card. That's what gets you the sales tax exemption. So it's the same ag producer's card you always had. It's gotten through the comptroller's office. You fill out the form, tell them what you're doing, and you get the card, you get the number. The expenses for wildlife are not necessarily sales tax exempt, with the exception of food for wildlife. Food for wildlife and horses is always sales tax exempt, whether you have that number or card or not. So any food you buy for wildlife is sales tax exempt. It's tax free. Your expenses that are going to fall under this sales tax exemption are your ag-related expenses. So if I go out and I buy a water trough and it's for my livestock, that's sales tax exempt. If I buy a tractor and I'm using it for the farming operation, then that's sales tax exempt. If I'm building a fence and it's to keep livestock in, that's sales tax exempt. If I buy a water trough that's for wildlife, any items, feeders and waters for wildlife are not sales tax exempt. And like my dad used to say, you just got to look at yourself in the mirror. So you look at what you're doing. Know that it's either for your ag operation, for the wildlife operation, and apply it that way. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see. We have had our property for about 16 months and it was heavily grazed before. Now with the wildlife exemption, I want to improve the grasses. I hate chiggers. I get that. Just doesn't look healthy. Can you address what would be a good way to go about this? Is there a certain type of flowering plant, something that would dissuade chiggers in the area? Okay, so this question, this is one of those things I go back to. I'm not a biologist, and I'm not going to try to tell you what you ought to plant on your property. That may be in your wildlife management plan if y'all talked about, doing some native grass plantings or native plantings on your property. That may be in your wildlife management plan. If you refer back to it, you can always call your biologist and talk to them about the soils and things that we know about on your property, so we can advise you on the right things to plant. I don't know anything about chiggers, and they might know some plants that help control chiggers. My advice, if this was me and I was looking at this situation, I had a place that had been overgrazed for a while, and I was just wanting to, kind of improve the native grasses, the first thing I would do is get somebody to just break up the ground. Go out there and disc it if you can. And I know if you're in the hill country, it's not easy to disc an area, obviously, because we're all on a cedar-covered rock. But if you've got some soil, break it up and see what grows. Over time, whether you disc it or not, over time things will grow. Oftentimes on places that have been packed down that much and grazed that heavily, it's going to be harder for that to come up. So if you can break that ground up, whatever's in that seed bank will start to come up. Got a great story about a guy who had a property that had been overgrazed for a long time. The only thing that grew was KR blue stem, nasty grass that just sat out there doing nothing. And he decided he was going to disc some paths all through these little oak trees that he had, and bluebonnets came up. They'd been on the place for 2 years and had never seen bluebonnets. They were in the seed bank. They just got covered up every year. And then, disc the whole place, and lo and behold, native grasses start coming up and bluebonnets start coming up. So breaking up the ground is the first thing I would do. Disc it a little bit before I start thinking about, spending money and planting a bunch of stuff. But if you are going to plant, talk to one of our guys about what might be right to plant on the property. Last one, I think our fence line needs some attention. I would like to plant something that would be hardy to grow and animals might like and provide a good hedge. Any suggestions? So same answer there. Please call and ask for your biologist who's been out to the property, or talk to one of us about that. We can help you find it. If you call and ask for me, I'll help you find the right person if you're not sure. But we can help you get an answer to that question from somebody that knows the property, knows the habitat, or knows the soils and what would grow there, rather than me just trying to, I don't know enough about the property to tell you what might grow. Now, there is a form of wildlife management, an actual qualifying activity that not many people know about. It's called fence line management. and means completely different than what it used to be when my dad was around and we were baling hay on the place. Fence line management meant keeping the fence line clean, or when we had cows, was keeping the fence line clean so we could tell if there was a break in it, kind of thing. Fence line management, when you're in wildlife management, is allowing that fence line to grow up, kind of like what you're talking about here. It's allowing a fence line to go back to natural. And the nice thing about fences are they're great. They're natural perches for birds, and those little birds will sit there on the fence line. They'll drop their little prepackaged seeds, and things will grow in that fence line, whether you plant them there or not. As long as you're leaving that fence line alone and not clearing it, things will grow. So it will eventually start to grow up with the things that are supposed to be there in your area, because those seeds will be dropped by other animals that eat them and drop them from that area. So that's a neat way of doing it without having to spend, again, much time or money doing it. Just let it go and watch what happens. Short of that, give us a call and we can talk to you about, actually planting. You want to take it an extra step, you break up the ground below that fence line. So you disc right along the fence line. That allows the weeds and forbs and things to grow and seed plants where the birds come and eat those seeds, and then they help plant some more. So just an idea. Done a little bit of that. Love to talk to you more about it if we ever need to. All right. So now we're going to get to, we'll see what we got here. I don't know how many more questions we have, and I'm sure Avalon does. And poor thing, maybe pulling her hair out by now, but we are going to we're going to the kind of open part of this thing. It's just an open question and answer. Y'all have been posing some questions, and we're going to try to answer some of them now and see what we got. And Avalon, I'm going to rely on you to kind of help me look at the clock. Like I've told everyone, we're not going to get to all these. I don't know, what we'll be able to do after the point. If there's a way for me to get to the questions and answer them for you personally online, I'd be happy to do that later. So Avalon, I'll let you start with some questions.
Great. And for those of you that joined a little bit later and don't know how to submit your question, if you scroll over the Zoom screen, you'll see a toolbar pop up at the bottom. There's a Q&A and a chat option. Click either one of those and a pop-up box will come up and you can type them directly in. All right, first question, and Tim, this might be another question for the biologists, but do you have any suggestions for shade-tolerant clumping wild grasses that can transition from wild field to backyard?
Oh my goodness. I feel like one of my biologists may have posed that question to stump me. I told him I wasn't going to try to answer anything I didn't know the answer to. So no, I do not. Not off the top of my head, but we can get you an answer to that question. Avalon, I meant that, well, I can ask you this later, but if you would, we have that question. I don't know if I have a way to get back to you personally, but if you want to send me an email, then feel free and ask that question. I'll get you an answer to it. I don't know the answer to that question offhand though.
I will save it and we can follow up. And a part two to this, you might know, is it too hot or dry to seed wild grasses right now?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that you're okay to seed them almost any time because they're wild. They're native grasses. I think fall is usually a little better time, is my understanding. But again, I would prefer to have again, I don't know your property. I don't know the habitat or the soils there. So that would have something to do with it too. So that's probably, it needs to be answered a little more specifically by one of our biologists. Sorry, I'm not able to answer that.
No worries. Next question. This is our second official year with Plateau and in wildlife management. We've been doing a lot of this unofficially for over 18 years. Do I need to be concerned with removing invasive species on our property, plants like Texas thistle? We have 50 acres and lots of these types of plants, and just wondered if that's something we should be concerned about.
Yeah, so concerned just if it's something that's bothering you. I remember talking to our biologist before about thistle, and thistle provides food and provides a lot of things for wildlife. And if it's not something that's in an area that you want to be walking around through or something like that, I've got it on my place and it comes up and then goes away, and don't have to worry about it that much. But so it's really just kind of up to the individual landowner. If you want to look into removing those or removing that or treating it, we can certainly help with some recommendations to do that. But it's not, I get it, as a property changes, things start to come on that you didn't see before, and there may be an overabundance of it. That's kind of that everything in moderation. So if you want to address it, you might call us and kind of let us know, tell us kind of what how big a problem it is, and we can tell you, whether it's something you ought to be thinking about addressing. You don't have to address it. As far as that goes, from a compliance standpoint or something like that, it's more about what you want your property to do and what you want out of it. So.
Great. I've gotten a couple of these questions. Will you please send me a copy of the PowerPoint later? So just to let everybody know, this is being recorded. I will be posting this to our website, and I can definitely send you a copy of this after this, this webinar is ended. Next question. Any suggestions on who to contact for resealing a pond?
Who to contact or resealing a pond? Yes, but not off the top of my head. I don't have the names and phone numbers and things. We have a number of people that we work with that we recommend that are good folks. I just don't have them off the top of my head. If you'll either send me an email or call me at the office, I'd be happy to share those recommendations and share those people with you. And that was the question, right? On someone to do that for him?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get you a number of people that you can contact and talk to them about it. We've got some folks that we feel good about.
Great. Oh, a follow-up to the invasive species question. Are there grants available to eradicate these or grants for reseeding?
There's a lot of different programs out there, and Shane Kiefer at our office is kind of the man. He's spot on when it comes to landowner incentive programs. There are landowner incentive programs of all kinds, native grass programs and other programs for the things you want to do on your property that I was shocked to find out in some instances they apply to, properties that I wouldn't have anticipated. I always looked at those as things that were kind of out of my reach. But it's really about, if you're interested in spending some money and spending some time on improving your property, there's usually somebody out there that can help you. So what I would advise is either, call the office and talk to your specific biologist who did your wildlife management plan. Call them, and like I said before, kind of the answer to a lot of these. If I don't have an exact answer, it's call and ask one of us, and we'll get you the information. We've got a booklet and information put together of these landowner incentive programs. So they are out there.
Great. And a follow-up to our quail question earlier, is there a way to introduce a sustainable population of bobwhite quail, especially in Waller County?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yes, but any biologist worth his salt is gonna tell you no. But there is, and there are things that you can do. And again, anything you do with quail, in my opinion, it's a labor of love. Don't do it because you think you're going to establish a sustainable population, but do it with the understanding that they're almost like a crop. It's like having chickens. My job on my property is to make sure that my quail survive. What can I do to help my quail survive? And anything you're doing is going to help them. Quail die off at an alarming rate every year, regardless of how hard we all try. The rule of thumb is if you have rain, you'll have quail. If it doesn't rain, the quail will not be there. They won't reproduce well enough. So because just about everything picks off and eats little quail. But there are ways to do it. There are some established and kind of respected ways to go about doing it. The bottom line is habitat. If you've got habitat and you can keep improving that habitat, you can have quail. I don't know of anyone who can. I've got some success stories. Be happy to talk to you about them more. Please, anybody that wants to talk to me about quail, call me. Just be warned, it's something I love and something I feel passionate about. Because I do know that you can establish a population of quail on a property. Now, they may go away at a certain point, just because of, habitat and weather and whatever else, but you can have some success. It's not something that's not worth trying. So anyway,
Great.
Answer that question.
Next question. I am currently in Ecolab and will transition to wildlife management beginning in 2021. I'm basically uninformed as to how to get going with Plateau, the steps to initiate, and what happens the first year. Any basic information on what I'll be doing between now and early next year would be much appreciated.
Sure, and I'm so glad you came. It was kind of a last minute thing. I wanted to make sure that I figured folks who are in Ecolab are wondering about these same things too, and who better to hear these questions from people that are already doing it. So between now and the time that you need to file for wildlife, you obviously continue with the Ecolab program, and you can call us anytime. You can start your wildlife management activities anytime you want to. You can start feeding for wildlife. You can start doing, predator control and all kinds of, you can do all those activities. I did them on my property for years when I was still maintaining livestock. So you can always do those things as the process gets started. So when you're supposed to file for 2021, we can do a wildlife management plan for you anytime. You may have heard from us already. If not, you'll hear from us soon. we'll send you out a quote for us to do a wildlife management plan. That involves one of our biologists coming back out there and visiting the property for that purpose, visiting with you for the purpose of making sure you understand what you're getting into, answering all these questions about wildlife management so you know how to get started. Then we go ahead and write that plan for you and all the applications, and we file everything January 1 of 2021. So you can start the process with us anytime you want to, just by calling, the office and saying, hey, I'm in Ecolab. I need to talk about, moving into wildlife management. And then whoever is the right person for your county, the region manager in your county that understands that area, we'll talk to you about moving forward into wildlife management.
Great. Next question, can clearing mesquite be a qualifying activity?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I hope so. I just did a bunch of it this past weekend. It was hot too. So yes, clearing mesquite certainly can. Again, there are different, there are ways of doing it. Lots of different methods. Of course, mesquite's just like any other kind of invasive. If you don't treat it with some type of poison or some type of chemical, it's going to just keep coming back. So it depends on how much you want to get out of it is how you'd go about treating it. But yes, clearing mesquite can be. There's certain amounts that have to be done based on your property, that kind of thing, and your plan will go into that. Your wildlife management plan will have some of those details in it, or your biologist, of course, can help you understand how much you need to do in order for it to be a qualifying activity. But it's a great activity to do. It's also a good plant to leave alive. So I was talking about clearing mesquite on my property. In that big open area that I was talking about, there are some taller mesquites that are growing up in that area. And instead of just cutting them down, I cut them halfway through and broke them over, which it makes into a mesquite bush instead of a mesquite tree, which is a lot better cover for wildlife. It's called half cutting. It's an actual method that's approved, and it's a qualifying activity. You basically end up with a living brush pile. So lots of good things to talk about if you got mesquite, but clearing it certainly is an activity. Thank you.
Talking about game cameras, videos are clear and more informative, but are JPEGs what we need for the annual report?
Okay, so repeat that question.
Yeah, so related to game cameras, videos are clearer and more informative, but are JPEGs what we need for the annual report?
Yes. So yeah, I've got a Ring camera at my place. It gives me all kinds of videos. It's kind of cool, but when we do the annual report, it's kind of hard for me to send them a video. The annual report that you send to the county is a printed document still. So you're going to send them a PDF basically, or a printed report. And so, JPEGs, and what you want are representative photos. So if I'm doing a camera survey on my property, you can run video and just take a snapshot of it. That's what I do with mine. I take snapshots of these videos oftentimes. And really what you want is just representative photos that coincide with your camera survey. So I did a camera survey in March. Here's 10 photographs, 5 photographs of what I thought were the really interesting ones. You don't have to send them all of them, but you want to, you do your camera survey, you tell them what you saw in the survey, what stood out, what the survey meant to you, what you learned from it, and here's some representative photos. That's kind of your way of proving that, hey, I did this type of thing. Same with any other activity. Those photos, you don't have to have photos of everything. I went to a landowner one time who asked me to help them with their annual report, and I got to their house and they had, if I remember right, it was 450 pictures of fire ant mounds. They had taken a picture of every fire ant mound that they treated. I went out and treated fire ants this past weekend. I took 10 pictures. We treated for a couple hours, probably treated 200 mounds, but took 10 photographs. And that's my proof that it reminds me of what I did. I remember being out there, believe me, but it reminds me of what I did. And it also proves to the county that, hey, I was out there on that day. And, it's a little proof of what I did. It just makes me feel better about, what I did than just saying, hey, I did fire ant treatment. So hopefully that helps.
Yes. And actually this is about fire ants. In relation to predator control with fire ants, do I literally take a photo of the ant mound before treating it and then a photo of a week or so later?
No, you don't have to go to that extent. So if I understood that question, do I take a photograph now and then do I need to take a photograph later that shows that they're gone, kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
You don't necessarily. So what I do when I treat fire ants is I find a fire ant mound and I'll trickle a little fire ant bait around it and put down, something for what do you call it? Scale, maybe a phone, or, usually you're taking pictures with your phone, but I took the bag of fire ant bait and I dropped it right by the fire ant mound. and I drizzled the fire ant bait around it and took a picture of that. All you're doing is taking pictures of the act of treating fire ants. Now, we've gone so far as having a little fun and taking videos of the fire ants taking the bait into the mound, which is, it's fun for me, and I can look back at those videos and see that, hey, they actually took it. I don't have to show that they're gone. Now, as you're out there treating fire ants, you're going to find dead fire ant mounds. If you've treated before, you're going to find, some dead fire ant mounds. You can always take pictures of those and say, here's some proof that, the fire ant treatment that I'm doing is working, but that's not a requirement. That's an interesting time to mention. Wildlife management, I want all of y'all to understand this, and hopefully you've heard this before. Wildlife management is activity-based. It's not results-based. It's based on the activity that you do. Your qualification is that you went out there and you tried. You did these activities that lead towards better wildlife habitat and better existence of wildlife. I'm treated 200 fire ant mounds this past weekend. I don't know how much good that actually did, but I know it did some. And the activity of doing it is what qualified me. If they all move off and go nest somewhere else, I can't do anything about that. That's wasn't my intent. So it's based on the activity, not the results. I don't have to have better deer. I don't have to have more birds. I don't have to have fewer fire ants. But that's what I'm trying to do. Hopefully that makes sense and helps.
Great. Next question. I understand there are months to check the nest boxes. I'm wondering how often during these months I need to check them. Once a week, more or less?
So talking about nest boxes and how often during each month, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So you only need to check them a couple of times. So my nest boxes, I check them once in the early winter, January, February timeframe, and I check them again at the end of summer. August through maybe October timeframe. You don't need to check them all the time. You don't need to check them to make sure there's birds in there. Again, that's the activity is I checked them and cleaned them out to make the nest, to make the box available. It's not about, are there actually birds in them? I remember a landowner or a property we went to one time where I installed with another guy, installed 97 birdhouses on this property. And the next year we checked them all and there were no bird nests in any of them. And we just got kind of depressed. Well, the following year, 80% of them had nests in them. So different timing, birds are going to use them at different times. You don't have to, it was the act of us going out there and checking them that helped that guy qualify. It wasn't that there were actually birds in them. It was exciting when there were. You don't need to check them, often. You don't need to check them a bunch of times during a month. Just check them at one time a year, clean them out. What you're doing is not checking to see if there's birds in there as much as checking to make sure that there's nothing else in there. I opened up one of mine the other day and there was a rat snake in it. There's wasp nests in them sometimes. You want to, your management of that bird box is not making sure there's birds in there. It's making sure that it's available for them. Hopefully that helps.
Great. And this might be a question for a biologist, Tim, but we'll go ahead and try it out. I have a place near cotton gin. Will putting cottonseed out for wildlife attract wildlife other than deer and hogs?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I know a lot of people the cottonseed's an interesting idea. My understanding is, that seed would probably be something that just about any wildlife would enjoy. Turkey, quail, songbirds, whatever it may be. I'm not sure about songbirds, but now whether it will, attract your deer and hogs too, I don't know, but I think it's probably good for just about anything. Again, don't know for sure. I don't know that much about cottonseed, but couldn't hurt. I mean, you're not going to hurt anything by putting it out there if you've got access to it. I would say it's a good idea, but again, if you want a real solid answer to that question, I'd advise, look in your plan, find out who your biologist is and maybe ask them. Or you can call me and I'll find out who it is for you.
Next question. If I'm feeding a mixture for turkey and songbirds, do I need to have my feeder on a high turkey platform or can I simply hang feeders from the trees?
Yeah. Okay. Let me answer that question. And that's a good question. I appreciate you asking. I want to back up 1 second. I got an answer to the native grass planting question from earlier. There was a question about, is this a good time to plant native grasses? It's bad timing right now. And I kind of thought, and whoever asked the question posed it right, is it too hot and too dry? If we get some rain, if you planted them right now, we probably get some rain, they germinate, and then they might bake in the summer. That doesn't mean they're not going to eventually come back. They need to plant, they need to have time to grow and go to seed. But it's probably bad timing right now. Fall and early spring is a better time to plant native grasses. So thanks for asking that question. Now, back to the turkey feeder thing. You don't have to have a platform feeder. The platform feeder that we have is, man, it's a great design. I've been filling those things and working with those things for 12 years now. And it is a very efficient way of distributing seed to birds and turkey alone without a bunch of other things getting involved. Any kind of feeder works. Hanging feeders from the trees work. We sell, we have those on a lot of properties. The deal with those is that, obviously it's a hanging feeder. It's not going to hold as much. You have to fill it more often usually. Your idea is that, again, is, kind of how much access you have to the feeder, how many times you don't, if you don't mind filling it once a month, then hanging feeders are great. Remember the size of your property and kind of the size of the feed or the amount of feed that you're distributing. So if I've got a 500-acre property and I put out one hanging bird feeder, technically you can put out one feeder per 320 acres and you qualify. So I could take a 500-acre property and I could put 2 hanging bird feeders on it and say that I qualify. Now, if I'm not filling those every few days and I'm not able to tell the county that thing stayed full all the time, and at the end of the year, I put out a couple 100 pounds of feed, I'm going to feel pretty silly. I mean, it just seems like a not quite appropriate way to feed the songbirds all over a large property like that. That's where a bigger feeder comes in handy. The platform feeder is just designed to be really efficient. It's designed to keep other animals out and to basically hit the target species of being on a platform. There's a lot of different ways to do that too. Some people put them up on different types of platforms, but lots of different ways you can do feed. There's no reason that you have to do them any particular way.
Awesome. And it is one, guys. I just have a few other questions. So if you're able to stick around, you have a bit more time, Tim. I think we've got just three more.
I got it. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Does removing Johnson grass count as removing an invasive species?
Oh my. You would hit me with one I don't know the answer to. I don't know. And I'm sorry. Write that one down and let's get that person an answer. I don't know.
This is a good one. Do I have to file a wildlife plan every year?
No. So no, you don't have to file a plan every year. Most counties will ask you for an annual report, and sometimes even the counties get confused about what that is. The annual report is a report of the activities that you did that year. It's different from actually filing a wildlife management plan. If we did your plan, it was probably done for a 5-year term. When I first got into this business, there was a guy running around who was doing plans for people for 1 year. So he was doing a 1-year plan, and then they would have to go back into the county and they'd have to update their plan every year. The county can ask you to update your plan anytime they want to. They will send you a request that says, we'd like an update of your plan. We'd like a renewal, a new plan. Normally, the counties that we work with are used to our 5-year terms, and so they ask you for one every 5 years. It's always a good idea to update it every 5 years, but you don't have to unless they ask you. Again, it's always a good idea to do it every 5 years so they don't ask at random, but you certainly don't have to do it every year, but you do have to do it when they ask.
Great. Next question. My main concern is to maintain my ag valuation. So how about leasing the land to some other entity who may make ag use of it?
So yeah, you can certainly do that. So maintaining your ag valuation, being in wildlife management, it maintains your ag valuation. They're the same thing. So what you have is an open space valuation, whether it's traditional ag of grazing or farming or anything like that, or wildlife management, it's the same open space valuation. I don't want anyone to think you left ag or you left, open space when you moved into wildlife. So going from traditional ag of farming or grazing to wildlife, it's the same open space valuation. Now, there's nothing saying you can't continue leasing your property. If you're in wildlife management, you want to lease your property for somebody to graze it, document that you're doing that and use that as a wildlife management activity. Do it responsibly, short periods of time, that kind of thing. You're not going to want somebody to come out there and graze it full time again. If you're doing that, then go back into traditional ag, file a different application with the county, tell them you want to be in traditional ag. So the two, they can coexist. Like we run cows on our place while we're in wildlife management. That's okay. We leased part of our property to people while we're in wildlife management. You can do that. You just want to be responsible about it and be mindful of the fact that, okay, if it gets to a point that I'm a grazing operation again, that's not quite the premise of being in wildlife management. So I need to let the county know that, hey, I'm going back into grazing full time. Hope that makes sense.
Great. And last question, this is kind of a follow-up to the mesquite question.
Hey, Avalon?
Yes.
Real quick before you get to that question, Johnson grass is considered an invasive species and can be, controlled as an invasive species control type of thing. So,
Okay.
again, talking to your biologist to find out, how much of that you might need to do, but certainly it is something you can control for invasive species.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No worries at all. This is just a follow-up to our mesquite question, and maybe we just need to talk about brush management for a second. But she was asking, can clearing cedar be qualifying activity?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, and that's one of those things that, there's all these different opinions about all kinds of brush management, whether you need to clear cedar, whether you need to, it gets to that mosaic block and whatever it is. Brush management of all kinds qualifies, whether it's cedar, mesquite, can be native, I mean, not native, but, could be thinning oaks. I know of places that do prescribed burns to thin, regrowth of oaks and those kind of things. It's any kind of brush management. All of that kind of in moderation, or what's right for your property and what you're trying to do. There are places where it's appropriate to clear every cedar that's out there. There are other places where that may be the only cover that's in that area, and so some of that needs to be left. I'll give you a couple good examples. I had a landowner I was working with who had a stream running through his property. Beautiful little area that held a little water even during the really dry times. And he had intended to have a group come out and they were going to clear all the cedar off of that creek. It was all overgrown. A bunch of it was almost inaccessible, but there was water down there. And I had a guy, one of our biologists, come out there with me, and we were looking at the property with the guy, and he was telling us what he was going to do. And I remember this guy, and the guy that we had with us at the time he was a water specialist. And he said, well, he said, you can do that. He said, but I would advise against it. He said, the only reason why you have water down in these pools is that cedar is shading it. Where most people would think that those cedars are sucking up all the water. In that instance, those cedars were the shade that was causing those things to continue to hold water. So, just be mindful of, how it's impacting your property. Ask us, when you go to clear cedar, think about, do I want to clear the whole area, and what's the habitat that's there after I clear it? You clear all the cedar on a hillside, like, where one of my properties is here, clear all the cedar on a cedar covered rock, and all of a sudden, what do you have? A rock. All the soil rushes down to the bottom the next time you have a big rain. That cedar is there to keep that from happening. So doing that, maybe you clear strips of it, and maybe you just, clear portions to where you leave some cover and you leave something there to hold the soil. So anyway, I hope that helps. That's a good question. Those brush management questions are specific to each property. And I'll never forget a guy in Edwards County calling me one time that he called and said, I called the county and asked him, what I needed to do for brush management. And they told me I needed to clear 5 acres of cedar. And so he hired a guy with a bulldozer and he cleared 5 acres of cedar. He said, Tim, it's a big scab on my property now. I've got this big open blotch that nothing grows there. It's just rock. And, but what he didn't realize is that clearing 5 acres of cedar, when it comes to wildlife management, means treating 5 acres of cedar. That could be taking out every 10th tree, or just the ones that are under 4 feet tall, or whatever you want to decide it is. So I hope that helps. It's a great question and something a lot of people struggle with. So good question. Thank you.
It's been very helpful. I've gotten so many great, compliments for this webinar and requests to do this again. So we can definitely plan on hosting another one.
We'll certainly do it again. And, again, if you enjoyed it, I hope everybody saw. I think I was supposed to roll to the. Are we towards the end here, Avalon?
We are. That was
all right.
my
So
question for today.
Just real quickly, I want to mention to everybody, y'all know who we are. This is kind of our family of companies. I want to take an opportunity, just like I've said before, you can call us for anything. We've got access to legal help, real estate, all kinds of good stuff. So don't forget we're here when you need us. And we've got access to things that you might not think about, ag applications and legal help and all kinds of good stuff. If you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. Most of you have already got it. If you're customers of ours, if you're landowners that we've worked with, you've already gotten access to the newsletter. If you're not getting it, subscribe to it, because it's a great way to stay in contact and get communication from us monthly. Avalon does a wonderful job putting that thing together. With that, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know we've gone over time a little bit. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did. I had more fun doing this than I've had in a while. I know I blazed through a lot of this stuff. Please don't hesitate to call me. My name's on here, my phone number, email address, that kind of thing. You can always just shoot stuff through the standard email at Plateau Wildlife 2. They'll get to us. More than anything, just remember we're here. Call us anytime you need us. We love doing this. I love answering these questions. If you did enjoy it, let us know. let Avalon know. I know she may send out a survey later. I don't know for sure, but if you did enjoy it, please let us know, because I want to keep doing this kind of thing. As much as you folks need it, as much as I feel like we need it. I think it's good. It's good for all of us. It's good for me. I learn a lot when I'm doing this. So thank y'all.
Thank you, Tim. And yes, I will be sending a follow-up to everybody. I'm happy to just send this PowerPoint where you can download and save on your own, as well as a link to this recording. So if you want to come back and listen to any of these answers to the questions, we'll definitely have that available for you.
Outstanding. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. Big hand to Avalon for helping do this. My gosh, I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of you landowners out there. We couldn't do any of this without you. That's the reason that this is possible, is there's so many of y'all that are interested in this. So thanks again. Avalon, are we pretty much done here? If so, I'm going to stop this thing. All right. Thanks again.